After 12 days of mutual destruction, the ceasefire between Iran and the Israeli occupation army remains fragile. Brokered by U.S. President Donald Trump, the truce was declared as a final end to the war and hailed as a major diplomatic achievement by the White House. But signs of instability emerged within hours. Tehran accuses Israel of continued bombings. The Israeli occupation forces claim that Iran violated the ceasefire first. Meanwhile, Trump lashed out on both countries, saying that they don't know what they are doing and that he has to get Israel to calm down. On the other hand, American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities have rattled the region and raised questions about what comes next. Will the ceasefire hold? Can diplomacy resume and prevent another escalation? Will Iran-U.S. nuclear talks resume despite Trump saying that Tehran's nuclear program is gone? And how will this war shape the dynamics in the Middle East? We were going to answer all these questions in today's episode of Think Tank with Mihal Al-Hamalawi. Stay tuned.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
According to Axios, the Trump-brokered ceasefire between Iran and Israel has temporarily ended one of the Middle East's most dangerous escalations in decades. The 12-day war began with an Israeli surprise attack and escalated with U.S. airstrikes on Iran's nuclear sites, pushing the region to the brink. Behind the scenes, Trump pressured Netanyahu to halt a planned large-scale bombing of Tehran, fearing that it would collapse the ceasefire. Through Qatari mediation, Iran and the U.S. exchanged back-channel messages, including advance notice of Iran's retaliatory strike on a U.S. base in Qatar. The war left Iran militarily and politically weakened, with key nuclear facilities destroyed, according to Axios. U.S. officials claim that the strikes created the conditions for peace. Trump, who avoided a wider war, now touts the ceasefire as a historic success and a symbol of peace through strength.
The 12-day war, which killed dozens and saw unprecedented U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, has now entered a fragile pause. The truce, brokered by U.S. President Donald Trump and supported by Qatar, began in phases. Iran was to halt its strikes first, followed by Israel 12 hours later, after which the war will be considered ended. But even before the timeline was completed, Israeli warplanes reportedly carried out fresh raids on Tehran, while the Israeli occupation army claimed Iran has violated the agreement by launching missiles. Tehran has denied this. Iranian officials insist they will remain committed to the ceasefire, but only if Israel halts its aggression. Trump had earlier celebrated the ceasefire on social media, saying that this war could have gone on for years and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. Vice President J.D. Vance called the ceasefire a reset moment for the entire region. Trump earlier launched his Midnight Hammer bombing campaign that he says had destroyed Iran's nuclear capabilities. However, the actual extent of the damage remains unclear. The United Nations nuclear watchdog warned of significant damage but urged continued inspections. The ceasefire comes after Iran's retaliatory attacks on the United States military bases in the Middle East, but also raises the question of whether Iran and the United States will resume the nuclear talks after the war ends. Tensions remain high, with Israeli officials vowing retaliation for any perceived Iranian breach. With no international monitoring mechanism in place and mutual distrust at its peak, Fears grow that this ceasefire may be short-lived.
Well, for more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin, Al Ahram Managing Editor, and by Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist. Welcome to Q News. And I will start with you, Mr. Izzeddin. Now, explosions were reported in Tehran minutes before the ceasefire came into effect. Is this part of a deliberate Israeli tactic to undermine the truce while publicly committing to it?
Of course, Israel does not commit to truces, whether official or agreements, as what happened in the ceasefire announced by brokered by the U.S. President between Iran and Israel. Therefore, after the attack, the Udeid U.S. base, some people felt it was a victory for Iranian side as a retaliation to the nuclear site in Iran. And in regards to Israel, with the escalation of losses and humiliation to the IDF for his inability to protect their lands from missiles, some people decided, some extremist Iranians continue to launch attacks in Iranian sites, military sites. The thing here is that the trust, according to the Israeli history, is almost not available. Therefore, violating ceasefire is expected and was expected even before the ceasefire's effect. In regards to Iran, there was a firing or exchanging accusations in ceasefire, but the President Trump's statements hours ago that showed his dissatisfaction of Israel and also unhappy with Iran, although the hopeful tweets about the beginning of peace in the Middle East and ending the war between the two countries.
Dr. Osman, now, Trump hailed the Iran-Israel ceasefire as unlimited and historic. But within hours, both sides exchanged accusations of violations, and Trump harshly criticized Israel for dropping a load of bombs, saying that he has to, and I quote, "get Israel to calm down now." This statement is very important. Now, how credible is this ceasefire? Is Trump able actually to enforce it, especially on the Israeli side? How would he react to the Israeli violation of the truce?
Thank you for having me, Hala.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. It's usually natural in all of the conflicts we have ever observed that even after a ceasefire immediately goes into effect, we always have some residuals of violence and some exchanges. This is natural. This is normal. This is not something that was unexpected in the case of a ceasefire. What happened was, after the ceasefire, minutes before the ceasefire went into effect, Israel launched the most massive airstrike on targets in Tehran and other parts of Iran. And today it appears that leaders and commanders in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, as well as nuclear scientists, were assassinated and murdered in these violent airstrikes. Iran retaliated to these attacks right also before the ceasefire with missile attacks that hit Beersheba in southern Israel, killing about 8 people. So the response was really strong.
Yes.
So, and then Israel claimed that another missile was launched, and this was used as a pretext to attack a radar in northern Iran. What happened during the attack of this radar is when the Trump show began, when he started saying that he was calling Prime Minister Netanyahu, telling him to call off the strikes, and then he negotiated with him the scale and the scope of the strike, and he even on TV he was very agitated. dropping the F-bomb for that. And actually, that's the first time I've ever seen a president in living memory, or even in the history of the televised appearances of US presidents in TV, that a president has used such a profane word like the F-bomb on
Yes, we
TV.
have
So
seen that on his social media. Yes.
that was quite impressive and amusing, to be honest. But of course, on a more serious note, I think that the ceasefire will hold because the Americans are holding the levers, basically. They are the ones who are controlling the temperature of this conflict, it seems. And if you remember, Hala, before this war began with you on Q News, I told you that Israel would never dare attack Iran without an American green light. And indeed, they attacked Iran with an American green light and an American blessing. And now
Yes.
they stop these attacks upon America's orders.
Yes.
And why are they stopping these attacks? Because the United States, President Trump has a lot riding on this. He does not want to get dragged into a long war. And because he believes that the United States has achieved considerable success in this war by supremely and strongly diminishing the Iranian nuclear program. And by the way, that's a fact. I know we like to repeat the allegations and the claims of the Iranians, but they are not true. The nuclear facilities were substantially damaged. They were not obliterated as
Even
President
though
Trump.
they were evacuated, I mean, still
They
the
were
site was
evacuated
damaged.
from the enriched uranium, and they were evacuated from personnel.
Yes.
However, they were not evacuated from the centrifuges and the equipment that enriches the uranium. However, this does not destroy that nuclear program. It sets it back a few months or a few years at best. Now, President Trump believes that he will be in a stronger negotiating position. And today, President Pezeshkian of Iran said that he is willing to engage once again in negotiations. So that means that the Iranians and the Americans have worked out some sort of arrangement in order for a diplomatic pathway, at least. And if it doesn't work, I guarantee you this war will be back in a few months.
Okay, we'll just have to wait and see. Back again to you, Mr. Azzuddin. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump said after the ceasefire announcement that Iran's nuclear capabilities are gone. That was just confirmed also by Dr. Osman, and it would never rebuild its nuclear program. After the U.S. bombed 3 major nuclear sites in Iran, how will this affect regional power balances after the war ends? And could it trigger a long-term shift in nuclear policy across the Middle East?
Yes, for sure, the U.S. Strike was impactful, and although Iran's attempt to reduce or to minimize the impact, but it was so deep after using heavy bombs, destroying the powers or the facilitations in Iran. I think the sites were destroyed heavily or impacted heavily, that they are not able to continue the work after after some time. Despite that was said that some nuclear and radiative materials were moved somewhere else, but the structures, the buildings or facilitations were heavily impacted. This is a glimpse of the future. It's continuing the nuclear program as it was before will not be as easy as before. They have some long months or many months have to pass in order to work as effectively as before. So, therefore, any issues in regards to uranium fertilization will will be failed. And in regards to intentions, we cannot hold intentions accountable to reuse these materials in making weapons. It has to have great monitoring from the international agency and the U.S. So I think all the issues are under observation. It would be very difficult to rebuild a nuclear weapon unless Iran has an ready Iranian head, and it is highly unlikely because of the threats and tense international ties whether between West and East or among the major nuclear players. This is about retreating or in nuclear file in the Middle East. With more stability for the West and of course the US and the European countries and Israel. And in regards to continuing or maintaining Iranian military powers, I don't think that Iran will negotiate or talks about de-escalating or reducing any ballistic missiles or any other weapons. It is a tactic strategies, and Iran cannot engage in a war against the US, but it can humiliate Israel and annoying it. So it's highly unlikely to have continuation or insistence on nuclear program unless there is a complete monitoring, and there may be other countries' intervention like Russia to maintain the peace and the stability of the materials used in the Iranian nuclear reactors.
Dr. Osman, back again to you. Iran reportedly launched missiles at a U.S. base in Qatar, Al Udeid, which were intercepted. What message was Tehran sending here, especially given that it warned in advance? I mean, this is the question mark.
I think that the New York Times and other media outlets and even American sources and Iranian sources have revealed that this message was directed to the Iranian public opinion in order to deliver the idea that they have retaliated against the United States. However, just like in 2020, when the United States assassinated the leader of the Falaq al-Quds division of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Iran responded by bombing or lobbing missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq in coordination with the United States, it turned out afterwards. And ironically, it was during Trump's first presidency. So now we are seeing an exact repetition of what happened. The only thing this time that they needed a higher value target. So the higher value target was Al Udeid because it is the largest U.S. base in the Middle East. And it appears that Qatar also did facilitate this matter for the purpose of ending this war. I'm not criticizing that. I think it was very sound what the Iranians and the Americans have agreed upon at the end of the day, because the Americans certainly do not want to be dragged into a forever war, another forever war in the Middle East, which could actually end the Trump presidency and destroy it utterly and definitively. And of course, Iran does not want to get into an open war with the United States because it will be annihilated, basically. So that's the equation here. So I think that this was the true purpose of the missile strike on the U.S. base. And I think that the United States wanted to contain this conflict. It was seeing that it was going out of hand. It was seeing that Israel could not sufficiently defend itself, and even the United States could not sufficiently defend Israel. Israel sustained huge moral and psychological blows in this war, even though not a lot of people died, about 30 people, I think. However, dozens of buildings, if not even more, were destroyed. Entire neighborhoods were ravaged by the missile strikes. Strategic assets like the Weizmann lab, for example, or power stations and other things were destroyed. Some high-value targets were destroyed. So, of course, it did not diminish Israel's military capabilities per se, but it did
cause damage.
Exactly. It did shake Israel from the inside. The Israelis are not used for this. For a while, the Israelis came to know how the Gazans, Palestinians in Gaza, have been feeling for the past year and a half or even more. So that was the thing. So the U.S. saw that and saw that they have already achieved some of their aims, which the U.S. aim was to diminish, not necessarily destroy, but diminish Iran's nuclear capabilities. However, Israel's goals were never achieved because in addition to the nuclear goal, Israel wanted to destroy the missile capabilities and even topple the Iranian regime. In actuality, they did not
But
succeed
it,
in
it did
destroying.
assassinate Iranian scientists.
They
Yes.
did, but there are thousands of Iranian scientists, and I did say they did achieve like diminishing the nuclear capacities. They did achieve that with the help of the United States, and actually, the definitive strike was by the United States, not by Israel, the one that targeted Fordow, Isfahan, and the other
Yes.
one, Natanz. So this was executed by the Americans. What the Israelis did is that they destroyed many military infrastructure, targeted civilians as well, killing hundreds of civilians. Over
Yes.
600 civilians died
Yeah.
in this war. We should never forget this because this shows how criminal the conduct of the Israeli military is. And they did not topple the regime. If anything, even though the regime's popularity was at an all-time low before the beginning of this war, what the Israelis did, this war of aggression, galvanized support for the regime, and even many opposition groups inside Iran decided to support their own government because it's an attack on their nation, on their government. At the
Exactly.
end of the day, no
Yes.
one should ever imagine that a proud nation like Iran would ever accept that the government or the regime should be changed by Israeli or American bayonets. This equation was really flawed by the Israelis. The Americans never had this goal, and they explicitly said no. Trump toyed with the idea of regime change. He was trolling the Iranians, basically, but deep inside, it's not within the creed of the foreign policy creed of the Trump administration to go into regime change wars. They don't do
Okay.
that.
Yes. Mr. Izzuddin, Iran's parliament has moved to suspend cooperation with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. What implications does this have for global nuclear non-proliferation efforts?
Yes, I think it's a decision unclear, or the format is a little bit ambiguous. We cannot consider it as an unofficial Iranian decision to pen or to hold decision with international organizations or nuclear watchdog organizations. I think it has to do with the interior affairs of the Iran to show a strong reaction in a return to attacking their peaceful nuclear sites. It needs more explanations or to be official, but discussing. But when it comes to Iranian parliament, I think it is a step towards making an official decision if were to be continued with the ceasefire. I don't think that this decision would be very beneficial, but it may be recorded as a strong reaction from Iran or Iranian parliament in representing Iranian people in return to the nuclear facilities aggression. In regards to international organizations, I think there is a slowing down, but we cannot say for sure whether Iran will withdraw from its treaty or hold its treatment or dealing with your nuclear watchdogs, or the international or the EAEA decision or treating.
Dr. Osman, now speculations regarding the truce or the continuation of the war remains. Nuclear sites bombed in Iran. How likely is that Iran will actually agree to future talks with the U.S. administration that just attacked its nuclear infrastructure?
Well, today, President Pezeshkian did say that he is ready to go back to the negotiating table. So they are going back to the negotiations at some point, I believe. And it's hard to believe that this war was ended without any communication between the Americans and the Iranians. That's ludicrous. This is not true. Most of the reports said that Steve Witkoff, since the beginning of this war, has been in regular direct communications with senior Iranian officials. The Iranians always deny that. However, it appears even from European sources and Arab sources that this is not true. They do communicate directly. So I think that they do have an idea in mind of some framework for negotiations, especially that now that the outstanding issue in the negotiation was the enrichment. And it seems now Iran's ability to enrich uranium is not there anymore in the foreseeable future. It can be, it will not be back, it will not be active again. Maybe it will take months, maybe it will take even years, because we do not know the scale of the damage yet. And it seems, since the United States is so confident that they can stop the military operation at this point, this means that probably substantial damage was inflicted upon the centrifuges and the enrichment facilities.
Yes.
So now the negotiation will be much less complicated. I believe Iran will buy time, in my opinion. Iran, if I were in the shoes of the Iranian government, not only would I try to bring my nuclear program back on track discreetly and silently, but I would do everything it takes to build a nuclear bomb. Because it seems that because the United States stabbed them in the back,
Yes.
they were in the middle of a negotiation, and then they unleashed Israel on them to launch a war of aggression that caused hundreds of deaths and took them by surprise.
Yes.
So, of course, and I think this is what the Iranians
This
will
is-
try to do.
This is a very interesting point, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'd like to thank my guest today, Dr. Muhammad Osman, International Relations Specialist. Thank you so much. And Mr. Muhammad Izzuddin, Al Ahram Managing Editor. Thank you so much for your valuable insights. And ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our changing world. And we'll just have to wait and see what's going to happen next, and we'll keep you, of course, updated. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.